Got to be you got to be reborn from above, I guess. I don't know how it might be better put than to be born again or generated from above. Makes perfect sense to me. What do you mean by idol worshippers? Somebody is objecting that I said some of the idol worshippers will have their reward when, of course, we all know the commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. The point of this verse in the Quran is a reminder to Muslims not to group people according to the clubs they belong to. It's saying if you look there and you say, those are the idol worshippers, watch out. Some of them are not what they appear to be. Some of them, you will find them in paradise. Just because a man seems to live in a certain place doesn't mean he's necessarily one of those. You don't know. God knows the heart and what's really going on. So you can't condemn somebody as a community. You condemn individuals as individuals for what it is they do. What is the precise formula to be saved? Well, really, I think this is just an effort. I'm supposed to guess which is your formula, whoever asked that, because many people will put it in different words, and if I don't put it in the words that this person has in mind, then I don't know what it is. I've heard many different ways of it being put. I suggest this is one of those phrases that we do well to think carefully about. Saved and lost, are these the options? It tends to sound like, there's one punishment for all crimes, and you're either lost or saved. It's A or B. Talk nasty to your grandmother or be a mass murderer, doesn't matter. It's one punishment. We don't run the legal system like that. So that's sometimes how things tend to look when you just say it's saved or lost. There is a short little chapter in the Quran on that subject that says man is lost. In fact, best translated as, for sure, he's lost, except for those who, and then it mentions 4 things. Those who make sure of the things they believe. Those who do everything they are capable of doing. I guess you could say that. The people who aren't lazy. And those who confront one another with the truth. That is, they don't just overhear some silly thing going on over here and they say, well, it's none of my business. No, they get involved to confront people with the truth. And number 4, where people are doing these kinds of things, they encourage them and become part of that activity. Otherwise, they're lost. But the contrast isn't there. It doesn't say, and if they're not lost, they're saved. It says you're lost unless this. Now, whatever label you want to put on that can be the problem. Usually the label is in Arabic they say the muflihun, which means successful. That is, you're going to have ultimate success. There's all kinds of things that pass for success, but the ultimate success, if you want to call it salvation, it may carry some of the wrong flavor. Please enumerate prophecies in the Quran. Mention why the Quran hasn't been changed and so on. Well, to enumerate prophecies would take some time. The kinds of things that go on are very exciting that way. That is, the verification of things the Quran has said long ago is now being paid a great deal of attention to by non-Muslims, to the embarrassment of the Muslims. In Toronto, the University of Toronto, there is a man whose book you'll find in the library here, Keith Moore. He's professor of embryology, author of many textbooks. Not a Muslim, but when somebody pointed out to him what the Quran said about embryology, he changed his textbooks where he described the history of embryology. In fact, he said, it told me one thing I didn't know, but when I checked, it was true. He put a picture in his book to prove it. So these kinds of things were talked about in this way. Many of them, at least. The Quran tells us it's going to be non-Muslims who find these things out. One verse begins by saying, haven't the unbelievers seen, predicting a time when unbelievers would be telling the believers about certain things which they have. There's that kind of thing. I'm a Muslim. I'm wondering why you don't explain to the audience what happened on the day of crucifixion, according to Quran and Sunnah. Please explain Jesus is not the Son of God. Just something that Christians never heard a Muslim say before, I guess. In any case, as to explaining what happened on the crucifixion, why should I try to do that? Why should I try to tell the Christian about some story which I don't have any proof for either? I simply said, I don't want to have to repeat it again. The Quran tells the Jews the crucifixion was not what it appeared to be. If you want to fill in the details, you won't find them in the Quran. You have to find them somewhere else. And even if those things are authentic, how are they going to convince the Christian? It's not an issue. You bring him something and say, look, I've got an old book that says this. He'll say, I've got an old book that says that. If you want to know what Muslims believe about the crucifixion, ask them. But I would remind you that any answer you're going to get is that man's personal belief. It doesn't come from some scripture. The word in Arabic there, shabha, means counterfeit or appear or be ambiguous or whatever or seem to be. It tells the Jews, this story you're so fond of that you killed the Messiah, that's what it looked like, all right. That's all. But you are mistaken. To fill in the details is really not an argument to have with the Christian. I suppose if a Christian became a Muslim, then he might be interested in this kind of thing, but he's not going to believe it before that. Is it true that Islamic law says a Muslim becomes a Christian, he must be put to death? Is this how Muslims are governed by fears and there's no freedom of choice? No, there's no Islamic law like that. There is the reality, which is really tragic. As I said, a person's crime is not what he believes. His crime is that he doesn't check up on the things that he believes. The difficulty comes, and it's a sensitive thing, but there are channels to go through. Since Islam is seen as a nation, it's not just a thing you go to church and take up from time to time. It's seen as a nation. If a man said, I'm a Muslim, but not anymore, that's something like an American saying, I am now a member of the Communist Party. You'd be a little suspicious of him, you see, because to be not a Muslim takes on the idea of turning against a nation of people. So it is that some of the scholars, the so-called madhabs, have dealt with this very issue to say, if someday you find a man who's a Muslim and he says he's not so sure anymore, he might like to try something else, says for his own protection, you better gather around plenty of witnesses to make sure this man knows what he's doing, that he is not going to sneak back in the middle of the night and kill all the Muslims in their beds or something like this. For his own good, he better clarify what's on his mind. Is he turning against the country, or has he got some problem with his belief, or whatever? There are channels to go through. Well, some of these are not exactly questions. Let's see. In regard to the concept of insisting on proving the unprovable, a person saying he doesn't challenge the idea that God is impossible to prove according to empirical means. However, if one knew God by personal relationship, and so on, would that not qualify as proof? Yes, I suppose it was, but there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The only thing one man can give another man is proof. Something like that. Say, here, look at this. A man cannot say, look, I have a personal relationship with God. Here, hold still, I'll show you my heart. See? You can't. You can tell him all about it, but you can't exhibit it. So experiences are valuable to the people who have them, not to anybody else. You can just tell people about it, but you can't show it to him like you can say, look what I found in this place. And he brings you some fact. Or tells you, look in the microscope, see this. There's also the point that if experience is the key, and it may well be, we have to be very cautious. That is, as people have pointed out for centuries, it's very difficult to decide that you've had an encounter with God. Suppose a voice speaks to you, says, listen, this is God. How are you going to make sure? You're going to say, all right. If you're really God, tell me, what was my mother's maiden name? Come on, quick. Only God would know that. Suppose you get the right answer. Maybe whoever it is happens to know. So what are you going to find a harder question? Say, quick, what's the square root of 144,000? Come on, quick. Only God would know that. What happens? You keep getting right answers, you see. It's a very difficult proposition. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but I'm just showing it's a very big thing to try to figure out what's going on. And if you get a certain feeling, that's interesting. It might have been something you had to eat. That's a thing a person needs to think about. That's all I'm suggesting. What do you consider to be discrepancies in the Bible? Well, discrepancies may be an unfortunate word. I was talking about really two different kinds of issues. I was talking about people who would say that God dictated precisely these words is an extreme position. When Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 that he baptized a number of people and he lists their names, but then he concludes by saying there might have been some others, but I don't remember. That's not how God talks. That's Paul talking.